A young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
This year marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of China-Russia Strategic Partnership of Coordination and the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Good-Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. Coinciding with President Putin's visit, the 10th China-Russia Expo is underway in Harbin, where nearly 300 Russian companies and over 5,000 overseas buyers are gathering at Asia's largest trade platform between the two countries. First, let's take a look at the expo.
The China-Russia Expo is the largest comprehensive exhibition platform between the two countries. The 10th edition opens on Sunday in Harbin, northeast China's Heilongjiang province. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin each sent congratulatory letters to the event, encouraging all sectors from both countries to seize the opportunity, make full use of their geographical proximity and economic complementarity, and further expand all-round practical cooperation.
Such cooperation is timely and far-reaching. We are here in Harbin for the China-Russia Expo, coming from Russia's Sakha Republic. Our region is dominated by agriculture. We are seeking advanced farming technologies, including irrigation equipment and harvesters. We hope to reach deals in the coming days to boost local development.
We are greatly inspired by the congratulatory letters from the heads of state of China and Russia. We will keep building targeted and efficient cooperation platforms and smooth channels for subnational exchanges between China and Russia.
This year's expo features 8 major exhibition zones, attracting more than 1,500 domestic and international enterprises from 46 countries and regions. Beyond the exhibition halls, Russian delegations have also conducted field visits to Chinese companies.
Regular China-Russia economic and trade events continuously bring fresh cooperation opportunities for both sides.
We will introduce advanced Chinese technologies and management models to drive coordinated industrial upgrading between the two countries.
Now, with the economic ties between China and Russia entering a more mature and resilient phase, what kind of new momentum could this visit bring to bilateral relations? And in a world faced with prolonged regional conflicts, mounting pressure on global supply chains, and an increasingly fluid international order, what role does this bilateral relationship play? To explore all these questions and beyond, we're joined in Beijing by Konstantin Sheping, commentator and China Friendship Award recipient. In Shanghai, we have Professor Zhao Long, director of the Institute of International Strategic and Security Studies and Shanghai Institute for International Studies. And in Almaty, Kazakhstan, we have Klaus Lors, distinguished professor of history and international affairs at the University of North Carolina. Now, a very warm welcome. Professor Zhao Long, why don't I start with you? Because I'd like to get your takes on this visit, President Vladimir Putin's visit to China, coinciding with the important anniversaries for bilateral ties. What do you expect to be the top priorities on the agenda?
Well, I think this visit, of course, comes at a very symbolic moment for China-Russia relations. You mentioned about the 2 anniversaries. They are quite important. And I think this will really, reaffirming the long-term foundation of such coordination. And I see here 2 major priorities on the agenda. First is, of course, the strategic coordination from regional conflicts to their spillovers and to the global governance, etc. So I expect the extensive discussions on geopolitical hotspots across Eurasia, Middle East, even Asia Pacific, and how to coordinate further within the platforms like the UN, SCO, and BRICS. And second, of course, is maybe the economic resilience and energy security, because with those tensions around the Middle East, especially the Strait of Hormuz, they're raising concerns about energy supply and the shipping security. I think the projects like the Power of Siberia 2 and Arctic shipping routes will likely receive significant attention here. So I would say today's relations between China and Russia is the most mature, stable, and resilient one. I think that will further build on the strategic trust, economic complementarity, and sustainable leader-level coordination.
Leader-level coordination is very important now. Konstantin, let me ask you about this, because officially, China-Russia relations are designated as such, which is a comprehensive partnership of strategic coordination for the new era. What does that mean to you? And given your observations of China-Russia ties for the past 20, 30 years, how would you describe the importance of Vladimir Putin's visit to China and his meeting with President Xi?
Well, as you said, the cooperation between two countries is described as comprehensive strategic partnership for the new era officially, but unofficially, just leaders of the two states, they call it the best ever. And the background for the upcoming visit is really nice. We do expect signing of more than 40 cooperation agreements. That will be a very rich outcome of a very short visit. Through that, we see that the strategic cooperation between the two countries and under the leadership of Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi is effective. If to compare, like Mr. Trump just visited China, and the outcome of that visit was a lot of wording, a very positive wording, but zero official documents. Now, the outcome of Mr. Putin's visit is going to be 40. Now, the most intriguing question of the upcoming visit is, will the sides sign the agreement on the new gas export pipeline? We are talking about Siberia 2 pipeline, which will be the biggest pipeline ever. Now, the two sides are already operating two pipelines. The first is Siberia 1, which is exporting 38 billion cubic meters to China per year. The second pipeline is under construction and will be operational by 2027. Now, the third one is going to be the biggest one, is going to export around 50 billion cubic meters of gas to China per year. And with the three pipelines operational, Russia will be exporting around 100 billion cubic meters of gas to China. That is of strategic significance. Of course, China is very interested in that, so we're going to wait and see if the sides are going to sign that. But as Mr. Putin said during the press conference on May the 9th, the two sides are on the verge of the new strategic breakthrough concerning their energy cooperation. So I want to repeat myself, 40 cooperation agreements. That's going to be a lot. We're going to wait and see.
Thanks, Konstantin. I don't know you're a natural gas expert as well. Professor Zhao, on the economic front, a lot is at stake. The bilateral trade remains solid and robust, according to their respective government statements. In the first quarter of 2026, trade reached $61 billion, up 14% year on year. That is significant. And the growth is based on the strong foundation with the total trade exceeding $200 billion already. And according to the Ministry of Commerce of China, China has retained Russia's largest trading partner for 16 consecutive years. How to read all these figures?
Well, I totally agree that these figures are significant, not only because of the scale, but also because of the so-called the structure evolution. Because if we look at the composition of trade, it's changing. So energy is still the backbone, but I think the cooperation is becoming much broader between us. We are seeing the rapid growth in machinery, automobiles, industrial equipment, agriculture, cross-border commerce, etc. So I think the relationship is really moving from a relatively a simple commodity trade toward to deeper industrial integration and even supply chain coordination. I think another important trend here is, of course, the financial resilience. Our trade is purely based on the local currency settlements, almost reached 99%. I think this is also strategically very important because it reduces the exposure to those so-called sanction risks and external effects. So I think that both sides understand that the next stage or mission for us is not simply to do more trade, but to hire or to reach so-called higher quality of the bilateral trade, through improving, connectivities, technological cooperation, and long-term investments.
I think you just made a brilliant point in that the composition of trade is evolving over the years. Professor Lors, your expectations on what's going to come out of the summit between the two presidents?
I think it is an important visit, and what we can expect is really agreement and deals regarding trade, energy, and also talks about geopolitical issues. What Mr. Putin also wants to know is really about the visit of President Trump to China. As in any relationship, there's also a lot of skepticism, and I believe that Putin will want to find out from President Xi whether any deals between the United States and China have been made which have not yet been known to the rest of us. And I think he wants to find reassurance that the close Russia-China relationship is continuing despite President Trump's recent visit. Clearly, geopolitical issues like the Ukraine war, like the Iran war, and of course the closure of the Straits of Hormuz will be discussed, and both sides will find that very important to find a solution to that. And I think, as we know from recent developments in Russia, President Putin has launched feelers to the international world about talking about more seriously about an end to the Ukraine war. And I can imagine that Xi and Putin will talk about whether there is a possible solution, a negotiated solution to finally end the Ukraine war. But that will all happen behind closed doors. I don't think that the public will find out about these very confidential conversations in the near future. But perhaps the action, when something will happen in Ukraine, and perhaps also some more active involvement of China regarding the Iran war, I think the action will tell what was discussed today and tomorrow at that meeting in Beijing.
It definitely will keep an eye on whether and how small-scale discussions will be arranged between the two presidents, because we know previously such meetings took place at leadership compounds as well as state guest houses on both sides for China and for Russia. Now, Konstantin, if we zoom out a little bit, if you look at the 10th China-Russia Expo, that is showcasing over 500 new products that's never been shown, and 800 new projects and technologies, with high-tech and specialized enterprises accounting for more than 20% of the participants. What does all this tell us about the state of economic cooperation between the two sides, moving beyond conventional energy sector?
Concerning that, I would like to give you a small update on Sino-Russian trade. You said that during the first quarter, Sino-Russian trade expanded 14%. Now we've got the new figures. In January-April period, the growth tempo was even higher. It was 16.1%, so almost 2 percentage points higher than during the first quarter. And of course, we except for the energy sector, we have a lot of fields for cooperation. For example, we are developing new space technologies. We are joining the joint moon program. Russia and China are cooperating in developing the power station for the future moon base, for example, right? That's the high-tech center. But except for the high-tech sector, we have a lot of down-to-the-earth cooperation perspectives, say the agriculture. Russia is expanding its agricultural exports to China rapidly. Unfortunately, the Chinese consumers are not quite acquainted with the Russian possibilities concerning that. I mean, just yesterday, I was speaking to a taxi driver back in Beijing, and when he found out about Russia, all he could think about is the bread, the vodka, and the AK-47, right? But Russian exports to China is way more than that, especially in the agricultural sector. My wife is Chinese. She loves Russian meat products, Russian dairy, etc., etc. So I think the point right now, and one of the ways to develop the trade, is to make Russian agricultural products more popular back in China to develop the Made in Russia brand. And the two sides are expanding their cooperation in that field rapidly nowadays. And if we talk, further, not just about the trade, there are way more other sectors of cooperation. Say, Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi are going to hold the ceremony for opening up of bilateral education years. That is of strategic importance to both of our countries. Why? Let me tell you. Because throughout the years, Russian and Chinese diplomats were complaining about a major deficit of the specialists who would provide the further development of Sino-Russian relationship. What we are talking about? We are talking about interpreters. We are talking about lawyers. We are talking about sinologists who will further implement the further development of our cooperation. We need more mutual understanding. And training more specialists in this field will be very important for our countries, because otherwise there might be strategic threats. I remember after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian sinology school also collapsed and basically depended a lot on the Western sinology school. So the West could provide and push a lot of its own agenda into a Sino-Russian cooperation. We need to be independent about that, and we need to further develop the sinology school back in Russia and Russian studies back in China to deepen our mutual trust, understanding, and cooperation. This is the basis of the further development of our cooperation. So, a lot of sectors to discuss, a lot of
I can see a lot of passion you talking about people-to-people exchanges. I mean, you yourself being the highest, you're receiving the highest honor that the Chinese government can possibly give to a Russian national, for that matter. I mean, many congratulations. Professor Zhao, on people-to-people exchanges, how do you look at the evolving landscape of people-to-people dimension of China-Russia relations over the years?
Well, I think this dimension, is actually sometimes underestimated by a lot of Western media, because many people focus only on, the energy pipelines, geopolitics, but the long-term bilateral relationship cannot really solely rely on those so-called practical interests. They need social foundations. So I think the fact that there are huge numbers of students are studying in each other's countries combined, and I think there's a so-called university alliances between us, which become the world's largest bilateral academic cooperation network. So I think these, I totally agree with Professor mentioned that the importance of the creating the new talents pool to evolve more, specialized, well-trained experts on Russia and China, not only to, emphasize exchanges of the languages or of the histories of both sides, but also to focus on those emerging technologies, to prepare more talents, engineers, media professionals, even entrepreneurs, which could, further adapt this new reality of the Industrial Revolution, the AI age. I think this may be the key, the topic or the importance for us to further enhance the people-to-people ties between us.
I mean, it's very important to have a global perspective on China-Russia relations, because some folks in the West look at it, from a very different angle. Now, Professor Loris, there is this perception in the West that somehow China-Russia partnership is essentially a de facto alliance aimed at countering another major power. But Beijing and Moscow insist that this relationship is fundamentally about strategic coordination and common development. It's about jobs, it's about employment, it's about growing the pie, not necessarily forming a bloc against any other country. Deterrence, we don't know, but threat, definitely not. How would you explain this framework, made by Moscow and Beijing of non-alliance, non-confrontation, and not targeting any third party?
Well, the NATO alliance is, of course, has a membership of 27 nations. Here we are talking about two countries, China and Russia. But it is, of course, true that and that is what we discuss right now, that China and Russia are very close and have grown increasingly closer in the last few years. And that refers to almost all aspects, including energy and trade, but also dual-use goods, which can be used for both military and civilian products. And that is, of course, highly contentious in the West. It's difficult to prove that, but many analysts say there is, much closer cooperation between Russia and China, which goes beyond mere trade and energy. And it is true that it should not be the case that we think of the world in power blocks, whether China and Russia confronting the West, whether the West confronts China and Russia. We should think in the West as one global camp. So we should really overcome that thinking in power blocks. But at the moment, global geopolitics really seems to push the traditional thinking in power blocks. Maybe I can also just add something about the issue we just talked about, the people-to-people exchanges. Many countries are divided by all sorts of things, particularly war, of course, and conflict and energy problems. But regarding people-to-people exchanges, the exchange of students, I think, almost all countries in the world agree. President Trump and President Xi agreed on extending people-to-people exchanges. That will also be agreed between Putin and Xi. And I'm sure if European leaders come to China in the near future, that also will be agreed upon. And I think that is a good sign. Talking in power blocks, is probably correct, and we need to do that in order to overcome geopolitical issues. But the future, of course, should be go well beyond that. And here, student exchanges, professional exchanges, language studies and cultural studies, I think that provides a better future for hopefully a less conflictual world.
Yeah, we need common platforms, especially in this day of a digital age. Now, Konstantin, since 2013, President Xi and President Putin have maintained very frequent interactions. President Xi has visited Russia some 11 times, while President Putin has traveled to China some 13 times. On different occasions, both leaders emphasized the significance of China-Russia ties, describing the bilateral relationship as a factor of stability in global affairs, underscoring the enduring strength and strategic nature of bilateral ties. In your view, what does this frequency and depth of the two leaders' interactions mean to bilateral ties?
According to my accounting, the leaders of the two states, they meet around 4 to 5 times per year. Except for the upcoming visit, I'm sure that Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi will still meet on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and the APEC Summit, which is upcoming in China this November in Shenzhen, if I'm not mistaken, right? So, according to my accounting, it's going to be at least 3 meetings this year, at least 3 meetings. And of course, the bilateral relations on the top level is described by the journalist as a very hot one. Both leaders call each other friends, and basically this very tight link between two presidents, it signifies the overall stability in the relationship between the two countries and overall stability in the region. Well, Russia and China, they basically provide a very good and working alternative to the otherwise chaotic international relationship. How can we describe this working, I want to underline the working alternative? I think it's well described in one of the books President Putin gave as a present to Mr. Xi. I'm reading this book again right now. It's a Russian 19th century classics, which is called What to Do. What this book is talking about? It's talking about the interpeople relationship, basically, which are not always easy. Sometimes they are hard. Sometimes they're even tragic. But they're always people-oriented and result-oriented, which leads to a greater good. That's the essence of the book. And I think that's the essence of the bilateral relationship and the diplomacy of the two heads of states.
Great. Thanks for letting us know about the book. Now we have about 1 minute left. Professor Loris, any final thoughts on the upcoming summit?
Let me just say that I agree with my previous speakers that leaders, the meeting between leaders has become very common these days and is of course very important. But I'm a little skeptical whether that really is the solution to go forward. Because what happens when President Putin eventually leaves the scene and there is a successor? Will the relationship between China and Russia be as close after Putin, or will it not be? So I believe that institutional foundations of a relationship, be it between Russia and China or between the United States and China and Russia, is very, very important. And we should not just rely on the meeting of leaders. We should have working level dialogues at all levels, be it economics, be it energy, be it geopolitics, and many other issues. And therefore, I think what we see now almost reminds me of the big three diplomacy of the Second World War. And that's sometimes
already, Professor Loris. That's all the time we have. Sorry to interrupt for this edition of the Harbin CGTN. Stay tuned and see you next time.